12 more hostages and 30 Palestinian prisoners are exchanged as the temporary truce between Israel and Hamas is extended.
Finland says it will close the last of its 8 border crossings with Russia on Wednesday over migrant concerns and an unusual surge in arrivals. The European Court of Justice gives the green light to public offices across the EU to ban religious symbols from the workplace in a, quote, general and indiscriminate manner.
Hundreds of Palestinians lined the streets of Ramallah late Tuesday to welcome 30 Palestinian prisoners freed by Israel in the latest swap with hostages in Hamas captivity. This was the 5th day of the temporary truce between Israel and Hamas, after a 48-hour extension was agreed. The military wing of Hamas Al-Qassam brigades posted a video late on Tuesday, this time showing crowds in Rafah, greeting a convoy of vans arriving at the meeting point where the militants handed 12 hostages to the Red Cross. There were marked celebrations among Israelis gathered in Sderot who cheered as the vehicles transporting the released hostages arrived. Hamas and other militants still hold about 160 hostages out of 240 seized in their October 7th assault on southern Israel that ignited the war. A spokesman for the Israeli government has said it would be open to an additional 5 days of truce under the current hostage-prisoner exchange agreement. During the pause in fighting, the UN World Food Programme is delivering desperately needed food to more than 120,000 people in Gaza, but has reiterated that the supplies it was able to provide were woefully inadequate to address the level of hunger.
Hundreds of thousands that are facing an immediate risk of starvation. WFP hopes for the extension of this pause, which offered a window of relief that could pave the way for longer-term calm. Safe and impeded humanitarian access cannot stop now.
While there does appear to be a willingness to extend the truce, which is due to end after one more captive exchange on Wednesday night, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the fighting will resume with full force.
A change of tone in the NATO Secretary-General's statements on Ukraine ahead of a meeting of the alliance's foreign affairs ministers has started a conversation behind closed doors in Brussels about what a possible end to the war could look like. Some analysts think that Jens Stoltenberg is slightly removed from the way he has been in the past, where he's always talked about defending Ukraine for as long as it takes.
I was left wondering, why did he say that Ukraine had already recaptured 50% of its territory? And I was thinking to myself, well, is this a sign that maybe NATO is thinking about the future of Ukraine?
Despite official reassurances of continued support for Ukraine, the EU is struggling to keep its word amid disappointment over Ukraine's summer counteroffensive and with the West's attention shifting to the Israel-Hamas war. Although no European leader would say it officially, there is a growing feeling that the war in Ukraine won't end anytime soon. Is this putting pressure on Kiev to start negotiations? Not according to the EU's Foreign Affairs Chief Joseph Borrell, who met with Ukraine's Minister for Foreign Affairs on Wednesday in Brussels, both of whom denied any pressure.
I don't see any sign of members having what you call fatigue. Everybody is concerned, everybody recognizes the successes of the Ukrainians, and I am sure the member states will continue supporting Ukraine because it's an existential issue for us. We cannot afford to get tired.
According to some experts, the real problem is that Russian President Vladimir Putin seems to be in no hurry to even think of the word negotiations. And at this stage, it would be extremely difficult for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to enter into negotiations, especially if this would impact the territorial sovereignty of the country.
I think some European countries would accept the exchange of land for peace. But this is very complicated, highly political, highly emotional. But President Zelensky himself would be the person who would have to make this decision, but it's a kind of treacherous decision as well.
NATO's support could play an important role for the future of the conflict, and the possibility of Ukraine becoming a member of the alliance could also be critical.
The big freeze on movement between Finland and Russia continues. Helsinki is about to close its last remaining border crossing along its shared 1,300-kilometre frontier due to a surge in migrant arrivals, predominantly from the Middle East and Africa. Prime Minister Petteri Orpo has accused Moscow of undermining his country's national security and trying to create a migrant crisis after Finland joined NATO earlier this year. In April, the Kremlin warned it could be forced to take, quote, countermeasures in response to the Nordic countries' accession to the US-led alliance. The headquarters of the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, ahead of a joint announcement from the Baltic nations that their foreign ministers will boycott the next two-day OSCE meeting in North Macedonia because their Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov says he is attending. The Baltic officials say Lavrov's visit risks legitimising Moscow's offensive. It will be Lavrov's first visit to a NATO country since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine began. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba also says he will not be attending.
Police truck drivers continue to block the border crossings with Ukraine over what they see as unfair competition. The EU scrapped entry permit requirements for Ukraine to support its war effort against Russia. Police truck drivers now want these requirements to be reinstated. For Ukrainian truck drivers, the 3-week-long blockade has not been easy.
Ситуація важка. Процедура, яка раніше займала 10-15 годин, зараз займає тиждень. Тобто оцінити це теж нелегко, тому що умови не людські.
Ukrainian sources claim that contrary to what was promised earlier, essential goods such as humanitarian aid are being blocked at the border. Ukrainian officials said police demands are unrealistic, with some claiming a pro-Russian sentiment among Polish truckers.
Despite the war still raging on, the EU and Ukrainian government are starting preparations for the post-war reconstruction of the embattled country, with the aim of rebuilding it better and greener once the fighting is over. The European Commission, Ukrainian government and businesses all gathered in Vilnius on Tuesday to discuss the necessary preparations, saying that once the war ends, reconstruction plans must already be in place. The war started by Russia has had devastating effects on nature in the country. For example, the destruction of the Kharkova water dam, which resulted in the worst human-made ecocide since the Chernobyl nuclear plant incident in 1987.
We have a unique opportunity to build back better and greener. So when we talk about cities that were destroyed, we talk about the sustainable planning of those cities, integrating the most recent knowledge. I'm very pleased to see so many architects across Europe who are actually devoting their time. When we talk about public buildings which massively were destroyed, hospitals, schools, kindergartens, they all will have to be energy efficient. They all will have to be powered with the renewable energy.
Ukraine currently has the most landmines in any European country, and around 34 animal species have disappeared due to the fighting. The country's forests have also suffered serious losses. But the biggest challenge is not only restoring nature, but also to have a climate-neutral economy after the war finishes. For this, Ukraine needs to transform its energy network and rebuild public and residential buildings in an energy-efficient way. The reconstruction of the country is a tempting opportunity for many European countries who've already signalled their interest. Representatives of the building industry as well as water and waste management companies also took part in the discussions in Vilnius.
We are not talking about just about international support, like directly support to restore something. No, we are talking about some investments. And first of all, we need to cooperation with investors to build new facilities, to build new technologies, to build new maybe industries, but using best available technologies in a European way, like in European legislation signed.
According to the European Commission, the reconstruction of Ukraine will have a massive cost and Russia must pay for it. Another challenge will be to convince the 6 million Ukrainians currently living in Europe to move home and contribute to the rebuilding efforts.
Any public office across the European Union now has permission to ban employees from wearing religious garments or symbols in the workspace. That's according to the EU's Court of Justice. The announcement came after a Labour court in Belgium banned a woman from wearing an Islamic headscarf in the office.
Une règle interne d'une administration communale interdisant de façon générale et indifférenciée aux membres du personnel de cette administration le port visible sur le lieu du travail de tout signe révélant notamment des convictions philosophiques ou religieuses peut être justifiée par la volonté de la dite administration d'instaurer, compte tenu du contexte qui est le sien, un environnement administratif totalement neutre.
Léonard stressed that each member state has a right to determine what a neutral environment looks like. While previous rulings by the top court determined that such bans infringed on religious freedoms, this time it stressed the need for, quote, equal treatment for all in employment and occupation.